Welcome back to another Reaper blog video. This is what's new in Reaper 7.0. There's so many amazing new features in Reaper 7. This video has taken forever to create. I don't think I've covered everything, but I've covered a lot of the big stuff and some of the small stuff, including the new amazing track comping and fixed lane comping features, track spacers, the new alternate keyboard shortcuts, the new mouse modifier stuff. There's a ton of really great stuff. Check it out. Of course, one of the big changes with Reaper 7 is the new theme. Let's take a look at what's new. So the track control panel layouts have changed a little bit, and you can see some different layouts here. So let me right click on this to choose a different layout, track panel. This is layout A. Let me just change this to layout B. There's a layout B, a layout C, and a layout A here. Keep an eye on track 3 here. If I close the mixer, tracks 2 and 3 have their pan controls hidden, as well as some of the other controls are hidden because they're right here in the mixer view. So usually when your mixer view is open, that's assumed that that is your focus. That's where you're doing your mixing. And so certain theme elements are going to hide. Layout A, B, and C are similar. Layout B has everything enabled all the time, and layout C has the track fader visible. Those are the main differences there. In the mixer view, there's a few different layouts here. So this track 1 is a folder, and it's assigned to the track layout B. Layout A is kind of a standard, kind of everything visible sort of layout. And then layout C is a sidebar view with the effects inserts and sends on the left side, and then a full height mixer channel. So you can use these different theme styles based on whatever your favorite is, or for different types of tracks. So maybe you want to have your folders on layout C just to visually separate them. That's easily done by going to the right-click menu, track layout, mixer panel. Let's change this one to C. Let's select all of these and make sure that these are on track layout or mixer layout A. And there we go. In addition to that, there is this white dot on the track which shows which track is selected. You can see that the color changes slightly, and we can adjust a few things here in the theme adjuster. In the default 6 theme adjuster, we've got some basic settings here that we can change. Text brightness, custom color, track labels. We've got custom color strength, selection overlay strength, inverting the layers when they're selected or not. All these sorts of things can be enabled or disabled or configured to your preference. Other than that, things are very similar to the default 6 theme, the UI colors and things like that. It's very similar to version 6. Track spacers. Add support for customizable spacers between tracks. Display track spacers in the mixer when mixer tracks are displayed in the same order as TCP. When multiple contiguous tracks are selected, spacers will be added at the start and end of the set. Support moving, copying track spacers with mouse, dragging tracks to and before, after, or within spacers. So track spacers, this is a great, simple addition to Reaper, and it just allows you to separate your tracks visually. The common approach was to just have a blank track, just an empty track between, let's say, the end of your drum track and the beginning of your synth track. You can just have like a muted track here and maybe lock the track height, maybe have a custom layout with a very minimal feature set. It just looks like an empty space. Problem with using empty tracks as spacers is it's always possible to drag things into it. If there's automation, that can get popped up into your disabled envelope lane, copy and paste, things like that. It can be an issue. It also takes up a track number even though you're not really using it. So in Reaper 7, we've got this new function for track spacers. You can right-click on any track and go to Visual Spacer. We have the options of inserting before tracks, after tracks, or before and after. There's also options here to remove before tracks, after tracks, or remove spacers. Since this is the last track in my drum group, I'm going to do a spacer after tracks, meaning below. And now I've got this little spacer. And this spacer is essentially just this empty area kind of visible through there. And in the mixer view, it's basically the same thing. So we've got this track spacer between my drum group and my synths group. This can be dragged around, and you can hold down the command key to copy and just drag to move. You can right click on it and you can remove spacer just like that. When you have spacers, the items are not going to go into that space, so you can't accidentally paste something into a disabled track. Now, track spacers can't be made larger or smaller. They're kind of just always this size. Track spacers are very simple, but super useful for keeping your projects organized. Track folders. Add preference to hide tracks in a folder when the folder is fully collapsed. Add option for track folder collapse button to cycle child track heights between various combinations of normal sized, small, collapsed, and hidden. Add action to show hide children of selected folder tracks. So this is another interesting addition to the Reaper preferences under track control panels. We've got this option here for folder collapse button cycles track heights. Normal, small, collapsed, normal, small, hidden, normal, collapsed, or normal, hidden. Normal, small, collapsed is what we're used to seeing in Reaper 5 and 6. So that looks like this, where I've got a folder here, and I click this button. Now they're small, now they're collapsed. I click it again, now they're big again. Now let's change this to normal, small, and hidden. So they're normal, click again, they're small, press it again. All those tracks inside of the folder disappear. This doesn't change what tracks are still audible or anything like that. Disabled, effects processing, all that stuff is still there. It's just hidden. Click it one more time and they're back. There's also a new action, show hide children of selected folder tracks in TCP. I run that, and all those tracks disappear now. And if we do this in the mixer, just select the track in the mixer, one of the parent tracks, run this, and all those tracks disappear. This next change is actually from the previous update, 6.83, but it was so close to the release of Reaper 7 that I think it got missed. I didn't make a video on that. A lot of people are asking about this. I also forgot to talk about it in the Reaper 7 FAQ. Track panels. Improve cursor feedback when reordering tracks and making folders. Tweak folder drag destination area to be the middle third of left fifth of TCP. The way we make folders is a little bit different now. So if we're dragging, let's say, these 3 tracks into the track above, we've got this new mouse cursor, which looks like a fist with an arrow. And if we move over to the left side, that changes to a folder icon. If we let go, there's our folder created for us. So if we want to take these out of the folder, just grab anywhere from the middle of the track, drag down, we get this new icon with the fist. That takes it out of the folder. We can drag up, and then just make sure that we're on the left side of that, and it will switch to that folder with a plus. There we go. That's making a folder inside of there. We want a folder inside of a folder. Just again, look for that folder icon. There's another addition, a late addition to Reaper 6.8 around there. When reordering tracks via drag and drop, hold Shift key to control folder creation. So if this is on dragging tracks, it's not going to make that folder icon change until you hold down the Shift key. Some of you may have had that enabled and forgot, but I've seen a lot of people asking about this. There you go. So one of the biggest features for Reaper 7 is fixed lane tracks and fixed lane comping. This is a huge feature. Let's take a look. All right, so I just pre-recorded some stuff here, a couple takes of bass guitar to go along with the drum loop. And so each of these takes has problems. What you can see here is the new fixed lane comping view. So we've got all these separate lanes, and there's a solo button or a play button, you could say. You can command click and then hear multiple, but by default, it's going to be just one at a time. And if we right click uncheck fixed item lanes, it's just going to be the last selected that you see there. And you can see on these 2 dots here, this indicates that fixed lane comping has been used, or fixed lane has been previously used. So let's just enable that. And then we can build up a comp. So you can right click anywhere on this column, comping, comp into new empty lane. This lane is now highlighted. These other lanes deselected, none of them are going to play. And the mouse cursor changes to a comping tool. So let's say we like the first note from the first take, but then after that we want to switch to maybe this other take, and this one was pretty good. This one was pretty good. And let's take some of these just to see. And then anywhere there's a gap, we can drag that or drag this. Now we'll resize that. There, I've created a comp or composite of all the different takes, the parts that I want to use. And if I play that back, it's going to be this top lane that plays back. You know what? This one here, not so good. Let's choose a different take. So in this one, we're going to just click anywhere. It's going to swap that, that performance to a different take. So wherever there's a comp area, these yellow rectangles, that's the one that's going to play. You can just click on any of them. Similar to choosing takes in the previous versions of Reaper. You can also use the actions for previous and next takes, but I don't have those enabled at the moment. Okay, so let's try this second one. Let's try to find one that's a little more strong. You know, I think that first one is the best. So we can just do that, and there's no splits. If we zoom in here, we can see that there is actually a split and a crossfade. And if you want, you can shift drag that around. If we're done comping, we want to switch our tools back to normal. We can double click on here, and then that takes us out of comping mode. And if we want to go back into comping mode, just double click on that track and you'll comp into that track. You can have multiple comps as well. So let's go back to comp. Let's comp into new copy. And so comp 2 is selected, but we can choose a different one. I'm just picking these at random, but we've got 2 different comps and come out of comping mode, and we can choose whichever one plays here. So whichever comp is last used, that's the one that's going to play in your project. Unlike takes within items, all of these are independent. So you can actually zoom in here. You can move things around. It's snap to grid right now, but let's slip them around to get better timing. Just slip that around. So you can do all that kind of stuff to edit in a comp or without comping. The items themselves can be moved around, copied, pasted, full effects chains. Everything is kind of independent. It's like having multiple tracks within the one track. So when we're done with fixed lane comping, we can leave everything like this as long as we come out of comp mode. That's the double click. Come out of comp mode, go to fixed lane comp or fixed lane tracks. And now the last comp that was selected is what plays in the project. That's essentially how you would use fixed lane comping. Let's look at some options and preferences related to this. Preferences, project, track send defaults. We can enable fixed item lanes by default. And within the fixed lane defaults, we can choose some things like whether the lanes are small or big, editing the source media while comping. Basically allows you to comp and move items around at once within different portions of the items. Definitely a more complex, advanced feature. So that's why that's off by default. Create comp areas for new recording while comping. Makes sense. Record into first available lane. So if there's multiple lanes in a different section of the song that are empty, you can record into there and it's going to fill up those empty lanes before it starts making new lanes. Layer new lanes. As you're recording, it should keep all of those lanes soloed, so you can kind of record in a loop and stack those sounds together. And then automatically remove empty lanes at bottom of track, just so that it always uses the least amount of lanes. So if you want to have fixed item lanes on by default, check that, and then every time you make a new track, you'll see that already enabled. Under the options menu, new recording that overlaps existing media items, we have options for add lanes or add lanes, layer new lanes, which again, instead of just playing the current lane, it's going to play the previous lanes if you're recording over the same section a few times. These other options are for when you're not using fixed lanes. When this option is off, split existing items, add takes, trim existing items, tape mode. These are version 6 and earlier options. I'm going to come back into fixed item lanes view again, and I just want to show you that you can right-click on any of these lanes, right-click and recording, and you can record into this lane. So you can choose a specific lane. So let's say, take this one and delete that item, then record into this lane. See a little tiny red dot there to mark that that's the lane you're going to record into for this track. So record on this, and it's going to record into this lane instead of down here at the bottom. And also, we can do things like grab a little section of the audio and then drag that down. I'm just going to copy that, and it brings that item down into a new lane. A ton of stuff you can do with this, like every editing function that you're used to with items across tracks in Reaper can now be done within a single track in this fixed lane view. Very cool stuff. Lots of options for comping, deleting, colors, playing only one lane, playing all lanes. I think there's one other important note about this, especially if you're used to item grouping and editing across multiple tracks. This works a little bit differently, and you should be using the track-based grouping for items. So right-click on the Group Enable button and automatically group selected tracks for media razor editing. Now, things like comping, let's enable this for comping. This is going to follow across the different tracks, okay? As long as you can keep those tracks selected, your take comps are going to work the same. Razor editing, all this kind of stuff, this works with the grouped editing. We can also select these tracks, right-click, and track grouping parameters, and then we can set these to media razor edit, lead and follow. Now you don't need to worry about selected tracks. This should just work, and you can comp into these however you want. Just to reiterate, while regular take comping works with item grouping, fixed lane tracks works with the track grouping. Hopefully that makes sense. Maybe this will change, but I don't think it will in the future because this is more of a track-based thing rather than an item-based editing. Sort of is, sort of isn't. This is similar to playlists in other DAWs. And yeah, super powerful feature, something people have been asking for a really long time. This is a great improvement to Reaper. Support up to 128 channels per track, 128 channels of in and out per plugin. Allow mapping, reroute, and loopback devices as regular channels. Add audio loopback support for up to 256 channels. When recording from loopback, MIDI, and audio channels, do not compensate audio device latency. So 128 channels, that's a lot. You probably won't need that, but the capabilities are there in case you do. Previously, the limit was 64 channels per track. We can set the track channels by going to the routing window, and then you can scroll down here, and all the way at the bottom, there's 128. For plugins, we can go to 2 in, 2 out here at the top, the plugin pin connector, and we can just go to track channels, set this to 128. In here, we also have the option of typing in other, and then we can just 128 and go right to it. And then the other thing was the loopback function, which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to make a new project tab, And my goal here is to record the output of one of the tracks from project 1 into project 2. So let's go to the preferences, and under audio, we've got virtual loopback audio hardware channels, 0. As long as we have this above 0, we can have loopback channels. And so I'll set that to 4. And there was a video quite a while ago about loopback. This is a slightly different, more built-in, less hidden function. So actually when I go to my track routing, my input, I'm going to have 2 different loopback functions here. The one that comes with Reaper 7 is this loopback input and the aux loopback input. That's the old way that I haven't disabled yet. So loopback input 1 and 2. There's nothing coming into that yet because the other project is not running. You right click here on the project tab and just enable run background projects and make sure that stopped background projects and synchronize play start times with background projects is enabled. Let's go to the routing for one of the tracks. Let's record the drums output. I'm going to go to the routing page, go to audio hardware outputs. I'm just going to set this to loopback 1, 2. If I hit record here, it should play in the other project. We're hearing both things right now, but what's getting recorded into this is just the drums, and you can see that on the waveform. Another cool thing here, worth mentioning now that we have project tabs, is the record and play buttons or icons in there. Pretty nice to have that. So I'm going to stop there. We actually do need to disable these other projects or disable the send. So I'm going to I'll just mute this send. And now when I go back to this project and uncheck run background projects, we should just hear the drums. So there's a perfect digital copy of what was playing out in real time. This can be a good way of doing a backup recording or have kind of like a recorder running all the time for your microphone, your main out of your project into a new project tab, and just keep a record of everything that's been happening. You might be wondering if the loopback is available in other software. Unfortunately not. So unlike the software loopback, the actual app called Loopback, and other virtual audio devices, it doesn't make a virtual audio device that is visible to other software. So it's just a Reaper to Reaper kind of cable loopback system. It can happen within the same project or to other project tabs. It's pretty cool to have, maybe somewhat limited, but yeah, nice feature. Hide actions like set default mouse modifier for context to action from action list. Instead, use rescript. So if you saw that line in the changelog and you were confused by this, there's all these default action things for every single context within the mouse modifier preferences. And there used to be an action that corresponds with every single one of them so that you could assign them to the different options here. Those actions have been removed from the action list, both in the main and in the MIDI editor sections, while the actual functions themselves are still there. You can still do those sorts of things, but you should use rescript instead of the actions. Well, the actions you can't do, but I'll show you how to do it in rescript. Let's take the example for piano roll, MIDI piano roll, left drag. The default is insert note, drag to extend or change pitch. And we want to change this to paint notes. Just paint. Instead of having to open this up to change default left drag over and over, we can set this up as an action. New action, new rescript. And we'll call this JT for my initials, and then it'll be MM for mouse modifier, and then MIDI paint notes. So in here, we're going to do reaper.mouse mod, and we got set mouse modifier. Yeah, reaper.set mouse modifier. And within the brackets, we need to add in a double quote and type in MIDI piano roll, space, left drag, comma, space, a 0 for default action, another comma, space, double quote, and then we're going to change this to paint notes. And then close the quotes and close the bracket. And once we hit save with Command S or Control S on Windows, then this is we're going to see this change here in the preferences. Oh, of course, you do need to spell it right. Spelling is very important. Paint notes. And there we go. So now I've created an action that will set the mouse modifier to paint notes for piano roll left drag, essentially making a paint notes tool. And then you would just need to make another action to go back to default. So you would just take this script here and add that to your toolbar or a shortcut that you use to swap those mouse modifiers. It's the next day and I want to show another way to create those scripts. It's actually built into Reaper and it's a little bit easier. So we're going to go to the preferences. We're going to go back to the mouse modifiers page. We'll just do the same example as before. So we're going to go to MIDI piano roll left drag. Here's my defaults for this. And I'm just going to export these as my defaults. Click on the import export button, then export script to set these modifiers for this context. So just this page of mouse modifiers will be exported as a script. In here, we're just going to modify this name, call this default, add a dash. I'm going to jump to the end of the name and add the extension .lua and save. The exported script is now available in the Reaper actions list. The script can be mapped to a keyboard shortcut or toolbar button. And we're just going to do one more here with paint notes, just paint, and import export, export these new set. So this will be paint dash and jump to the end, and we'll set this to .lua, and there we go. And that is now automatically added to the action list. MIDI piano roll in the MIDI editor section. There we go. So here's the new scripts that I just created. Set mouse modifiers, MIDI piano roll left drag. Right, so here's my default. And so I've got this click to insert a note, drag to change the length. And I'm going to run this action paint, set mouse modifier. And now I've got the brush tool and I can paint in following the note length. So if you wanted a paint tool, you just add that to a toolbar. And inside that script, it's basically the same thing as I was doing before, but it does the entire page all at once. Don't need to learn scripting or anything like that. So as long as you have the descriptive name and the extension, you're good to use this. Actions window. Add options button to action window. Add menu items to import, export, reset, clear keyboard shortcuts for the current section. Keyboard. Add multiple alternate main keyboard sections. Add actions to switch between them persistently or momentarily. So when we look at the Reaper 7 action list, there's a few things here that are new. First one is this little options button here. These options are available when you right-click on any item, but it might not be intuitive to do that. You can also find it if you right-click in an empty section. But yeah, options button for things related to the actions window. Also, under the key map button, there's import and export options in here now. There's a reset and remove all shortcuts option. So let's say we go to main Alt 1 and go to key map. We could remove all shortcuts from the section. And now if we go back to main, none of my original shortcuts are lost. So I could, let's say, export for this section only. And I'll just put that on the desktop for now. And I go to Alt 1, key map, import and map to this section. I can select that and open it. And now all of my custom shortcuts are here. And then I can just make the changes that I need for the one or two things. And then the other thing to mention, you've already seen me go through this menu here. We've got 16 alternate main action lists, which is a lot, but that gives you the ability to set 16 different entirely new sets of shortcuts for the main Reaper window, which allows you to do some creative things or possibly accommodate for different keyboards or controller setups, or just temporarily change whatever keyboard button you're pressing to another option. For example, Kenny had a video about using importing and exporting keyboard shortcuts depending on the work that he was doing, or even having separate installs of Reaper, maybe one for video editing, one for drum editing, one for tracking, and different keyboard shortcuts for each of them. Now you can kind of do that all within here by using these overrides and toggles to go to the alternate modes. Momentary will wait for your next input and then switch back to your main. Toggles will remain on that setting until you run that action again, and it will return to your main action list. So yeah, if you're a power user of Reaper and you want to completely customize your keyboard based on what you're doing that day, if you're tracking vocals, you need a certain set of keyboard shortcuts, but when you're editing a video, you want a completely different set of shortcuts on the same keys, you can do this now without importing and exporting. You can kind of just do this all from the action list. Actions. Add action to color all takes that share the same source media with the same color. Add actions to select all media items that use the same source media. Add action to paste tracks or items at mouse position. Add action to apply first track or take effects to items. Back to the action list. Let's do that in reverse order. So if we search for first effects, we've got a few different actions here. Apply first take effects to items, first take effects to items with mono output. We can also do that with track effects and again with mono output. This is great for Melodyne workflows. So if you have Melodyne as the first insert slot on that track or on the item, which it needs to be for the ARA function, yeah, you can render that to a mono output and then disable Melodyne. Great to have these actions here. This mono output one for the track effects or the items is probably the one to use. So you would use this to render your pitch correction without your compression, your EQ, and all those other things. Just saves you some time not having to bypass the effects, that sort of thing. Here's an interesting one, paste items tracks at mouse position. So we just need to copy any item or track, whatever the last one was touched, run this action to paste it wherever your mouse is pointing, which is a pretty cool function. I've got this on Alt-V. So if I copy this item and then press Alt-V, wherever my mouse is pointing, that's where that item's going to go to. And it can be on different tracks, wherever I'm pointed at. I can also copy this track and then point at, let's say, the conga groove track, and then Alt-V, and that puts that in there, or after the tambourine, or after this chord. It's a way you can paste a track without having to first select the track and then hit your paste function. Let's just clean up that project a bit. Yeah, and it's a way of pasting without having to first click your mouse cursor to the spot you want. You can just point it, and it's going to snap to grid. And let's do this with snap to grid turned off. So again, I'm going to copy these and then Alt-V to paste. And you can see that this can get pretty cluttered. Maybe that's an action that you want to use without having to left click all the time. We also have this action, select all other media items that share the same source media as selected items. Kind of cool. Let's grab the snare and then hit run. Now that's selected all of the snares here that are the same. So if you ever have one that's on a different track or outside of the time selection, if I want to replace all of these snares with some other source, it's much easier when I can select them this way from the action list. Let's grab a couple of these items here. And so I've got mostly the same action, or mostly the same items, one that's different, and I'm going to run this action, set all media item takes that share the same source media to the same random color. If I run this, only the ones that are the same are going to be colored. So that means that we can just grab all of these items here, hit run on that. They're all going to get random colors, but it's going to be consistent random colors across tracks, where any of the items that are the same get the same color. Without this action, that would be kind of complicated to do. So this is a nice addition. Backups. Add configuration for path to autosave unsaved projects. Default to saving up to 50 timestamped projects in backups directory for new users. Optionally save timestamp backup projects to backups directory, auto-saved projects to autosaves directory. Optionally keep last X copies or X unique days of copies of timestamped backups. Now, this is something that I've talked about many times in the past, in the Fresh Start series, in the All the Defaults Are Wrong series. This is a great addition. I'm glad they finally have done this. So in the preferences, there's a new page dedicated to backups where everything related to backups is here. And on new installs, some of these things will be set by default. Super awesome. I love that they've done this. So let's go through these options. Preserve previously saved version of project as project.rpp-back. Great option to keep enabled. Preserve all previously saved versions of project in one large backup project. Interesting, but I wouldn't recommend it. Preserve previously saved versions of projects as project-timestamp-rpp-back. You can do this, and you can set this into a separate subdirectory. You can limit it to recent versions or unique days, but I would, again, recommend not doing that. For autosaves, you can autosave timestamp file into the project directory, so wherever your project is saved, it will create a backups directory. It will put those timestamp backups into there. This is the one that should be enabled by default on new installs. I'm actually going to set this up a different way, so I have a separate backups folder, which I can just automate to clean rather than a backups folder per project. One new feature that I will enable here is limit backups to the most recent. Let's do 10 copies for the current project. You can also do unique days for current project. So if you work on the 10th, 11th, 12th, 3 unique days. And once you get up to 10 days in a row, or not in a row, but 10 unique days, it will start deleting the oldest backups. So copies for all projects or unique days for all projects. I like the copies for current project. I'm just going to limit that to 10. So I'm never going to have more than 10 copies of projects with the same name within my backups directory. And then there's autosave interval. I like 6 minutes when not recording. And there's also an autosave path for unsaved projects. Let's just choose the documents, Reaper Media, make a new folder called backups or auto backups. I recommend you guys do the same thing. Just set up an auto backups folder in your Reaper Media folder so that when you start recording and you haven't saved your project, your backups will go there so that even unsaved projects get backups in case of a plugin crashing Reaper, that sort of thing. So those are the new auto backups functions. This particular feature, the limit backups to the most recent, that has been requested for years. It's great that they've finally added that in addition to having autosave on by default for new users. Great stuff. Effects. Support processing multiple plugins in parallel. Support effects containers, subchains of effects with configurable in-output processing channels, configurable parameter mappings, channel feedback, internal modulation of parameters using parent modulation automation as baseline for any container modulation. So let's start with parallel processing within effects chains. This is a great addition. Here's my drums for this project. I probably can't get into this next section without even talking about containers, so let's jump into that as well. So I've got a effects container, which you can just add from the effects folder, just called container. Should be right there up at the top. You can also right-click, add container, or select any effects and move effects to container. What we want to do here is take this Valhalla plate and this EQ and run this in parallel with the previous effect. Recomp doing quite a bit of compression here. And if we run this reverb and EQ in parallel with the previous effects, now the reverb is not going to get the compressed signal anymore. The reverb is going to get the original signal. And let's run this again at 100%. I had that at about 40% wet. So here it is at 100% wet. We're going to get lots of reverb. That makes a big difference, doesn't it? So these next effects get the output of the container with the reverb, but this reverb is not getting the compressed signal again. Also use the wet-dry controls up here at the top to dial that back into a more appropriate level. So this just kind of saves you having to send out to other tracks in some situations to do parallel processing. Ultimately, can give you a lot more control. So let's talk about containers. Containers are just FX chains within FX chains. You can use these in multiple ways. Containers can condense your effects chain into a smaller main list. They can also be used for creative effects with series and parallel effects within different containers, and mid-side processing. All these sorts of things can be done. It's a really cool system. Effects containers definitely warrant additional videos. Kenny's done one already. I'm sure that I'll do another one, but I'll just show you one more thing here related to the automation and parameter controls. So let's say we want to take the low gain of this Valhalla plate here. I want to adjust this from the track envelope, but this is inside of a container. So it's not directly accessible from the track. We're going to touch that parameter, go to the param menu here, and then map to container parameter. Okay. Now, if we touch this again, this second param button can now see that it's Valhalla plate, low EQ gain, and now we can show this in track controls, track envelope, or parameter modulate this. Effects inside of containers need to link the parameters that you want to modulate or automate with the containers set of parameters, and then you can do all the usual things. So it's just one extra step for these things. But let's say I do track envelope, and there's the track envelope for the low gain on this plugin, adjustable from your range view. If you have containers inside of containers, there's an additional step. You got to link that plugin to link to the container that it's in, and then set that container's parameter to the next container above it, and then link that to your track controls, envelope, or parameter modulation. It can be some extra steps. Maybe they'll improve this with some sort of drag and drop function. I don't know. Haven't seen anything about that yet, but that would make things a lot simpler. That's about it for parallel effects and containers at this point. FX sidechain. Allow drag and drop sidechain creation to effects in containers and floating windows. When creating a sidechain via drag and drop to effects, always add or route new track channels. Reconfigure pin mappings for sidechain if effects has 4 inputs. So this is actually a pretty important change. You might run into some issues if you're used to kind of the old way. In this little project, I've got a kick, snare, and a bass, and I want the kick and the snare to trigger compression on the bass so that it ducks. So here's how it sounds without the compression active. All right, so I've got recomp here on the bass track. If I drag and drop from the routing button onto the plugin, that's going to use my default send level. I'll just bump that up to 0 dB. And you can see here that it's incremented the channels to 3 and 4. So it's sending from 1 and 2, the sound of the kick, into channels 3 and 4 of the bass channel, which is the external sidechain for the recomp. So I'll just set this to auxiliary inputs. Got this at a 4:1 ratio, and I'll turn down the threshold until I start to see some compression. Something like that. So let's add in the snare drum to this. So if I do the exact same thing, drag and drop the routing button onto the bass compressor, take a note of this. It's actually increased the number of channels to 5 and 6. So if I play this back, instead of seeing compression happening from the kick and the snare on the bass, we're actually only going to see it happening from the snare drum. And that's not how it used to work. So again, this could be a good feature, this could be a bad feature. Let's reset that. So I'm going to delete these two sends. I'm going to reset this track to 2 channels. So this is basically how it was before. No sends, no compression. This time I'm going to take the 2 tracks and drag the routing while holding Shift into the plugin. And now both of these sends are using 3 and 4. So holding Shift while dragging the routing button to the plugin is going to increase the number of channels to 3 and 4, and both sends are going to be the same, sending from channels 1 and 2 to 3 and 4. And if I play this back, that actually works great. Let me just delete this send from the snare track. If we wanted to kind of reproduce our usual workflow of sending the kick, figuring out the compression, then sending the snare in, we just have to do things a little bit differently. I'm just going to come over to the mixer view where the sends are visible. And I'm just going to do this basically the same way. So instead of dragging the routing button to the plugin, just drag a send to the plugin. And now this is going to reuse channels 3 and 4. So very slight difference, just one thing different that we're dragging, and it doesn't increase the track channels when we're using the send section, only when we're dragging the routing button there. But if we did it just a regular send from the snare track to the bass track, that would have sent on channels 1 and 2. So dragging into the plugin increases the track channels when it's dragged from the routing button. But if we drag from the send section, it's going to reuse that last used, or the sidechain input, usually 3 and 4. And now how does this sound? So it's ducking the way that I want it. So it's a kind of a subtle tweak to the way that we're used to working. It's great when you want those track channels to increase each time for the plugins that support multiple inputs, but we don't always want that. So just the one thing to be aware of, if you're sending a second input into something that has a sidechain set up already, and you don't want to increase the channels, use the sends onto the plugin rather than the routing button onto the plugin, or sends onto the track. And if you want to do multiple tracks at once, you can hold down Shift. If you want to do multiple tracks at once, while also disabling the master send from those sending tracks, you can hold down the Shift and Alt keys. Preferences. Add new envelope colors preference page. Support custom envelope colors based on envelope name. Add new item fade defaults, item loop defaults preferences pages. Add button to preferences/project to open project settings dialog. Add preference for default fixed lane track configuration. Add preferences for crossfade behavior for various contexts. Add preferences for track meter display defaults. All right, so there's a lot of new things in the preferences to look at. I'm not going to go through everything here, but I will take a look at some of these. This one here, item fade defaults, is super important. Yeah, this is kind of a redesign of the whole thing, giving many more options. These are the settings that I like. These are not the default settings, but hopefully you find them interesting and useful. I've never been a fan of the fade in and fade out functions. Most of the time I do not like that because it can leave a gap between wherever their edit is, there's going to be a gap. I always like the overlap and crossfade function used instead. For fixed lane comps, these things are linked, but generally when they're overlapping, they're going to crossfade, and otherwise at the ends, it's going to fade in, fade out. Item looping defaults, these are now on a new page. I would suggest turning off looping for everything. That's just my preference. Under Preferences Project, we now have this button here to open up the project settings. Envelope colors is a way that we can customize envelope colors based on names, which is pretty cool, rather than having to go into the action list, going to theme, tweak, and then search for envelope. You can still do this. This should still work, particularly for effects parameters. It cycles through these 4 parameter colors. And if you want to have, let's say, anything with the word gain in it to have a certain color, you can enable that here. So you can just double click gain, and then pick a color. Let's say this green will always be used for gain, and apply. And so let's find a plugin that has gain, maybe this one, parameter, global gain, show track envelope. And there we go. So it's selected that color. That color may actually be pretty close to the default. So I'm gonna just choose a different color. Let's say this blue. You can see that that changes instantly. Pink. And there we go. You can use anything you want as the name in the string section, and you can turn that on and off there. You can go deep with this. You can import and export these things. Yeah, there's a lot more stuff in the preferences, but we're going to leave it there for today. Meters. Add per track option to display gain reduction from VST or JSFX plugins that report gain reduction to the host. Gain reduction metering preferences in appearance track control panels. All right, so gain reduction metering, it's actually pretty simple here. Plugins that do gain reduction, like compressors and limiters, some of the ones built into Reaper, and some third-party ones, will report to the host how much gain reduction they're doing. And then Reaper can display that on the track meters. So we're going to see that here on the left side and here on the large strip for this OBXD track. And we'll see the gain reduction should match what's in recomp. We can enable this per track by right-clicking, going to Meters, and set this to Display Gain Reduction for plugins that support it. You can find the same menu in the mixer, and also in the preferences, Track Send Defaults, Track Meter Display. I'm going to set this to stereo peaks, multi-channel peaks, all these options that we've had for a little while, and this new one, Display Gain Reduction for plugins that support it. So this is how you would enable it for all new tracks. If you have older projects, that's not going to be enabled, so you can enable that in the individual tracks. You can always select all and apply that from the menu. Mouse modifiers. Add multiple arrange view mouse modifier override sections to define new behaviors when left mouse dragging in arrange view. All right, so this is pretty cool, actually. You may notice some new toolbar buttons in your main toolbar if you haven't customized your main toolbar. And if you have, you'll just need to re-enable those options here. These two were added, override mouse modifiers for marquee selection and for razor editing. So let's look at marquee selection. So when that's enabled, just click on it. It does a little highlight there, and then you can marquee select. So anytime I left drag over items, it's going to marquee select, and then I can come out of this option and I can move them around, that sort of thing. And the button beside that, I'm just left clicking that enables razor editing. So anytime I left drag over items or the arrange view, it adds a new razor edit area, and then I can, move that around. I can duplicate it. Tons of stuff you can do with razor edits. That came out in version 6. So I'm not going to talk about it too much, but just new tools basically for the main toolbar with simple, straightforward selection and razor edit tools. So our default mouse modifiers for arrange view are here. And then there's the 4 new ones. So A, B, C, and D. C is for the comping lanes. And so that essentially turns on when you're in that mode, when a track has comp enabled. And mode D is for selecting time, making time selections. And then along with that, there are actions to toggle that. So let's search for arrange override. And we've got clear arrange view override modifiers, basically just turning that off. We've got set to mode A, set until next mouse up, which is pretty cool. So we can set this to A. Now I'm in marquee select. And the next time right after I select something, so I select these, it comes back into the normal arrange view left drag behavior. I can do that for B as well. So my next mouse down and drag is going to be a razor edit. And then it goes back to normal editing mode. Super cool. There's C, which is the comping mode, which you can see the cursor change, but is really only going to work in the comping areas. And then D is a mode for just for making time selections. It ignores the items. It only sets time selections. So there's actions for setting momentarily, and for toggling. So if you are only switching between modifiers default and B, you could run this. So I run that once. Now I'm in razor edit mode, run it a second time. Now I'm back to normal. And you could just have that on, let's say, the letter M, and it just toggles that on and off. That's a pretty cool new addition to Reaper. Recording. Display loop counter during recording. Takes. Add action to mark previous recording pass for deletion. Delete takes that are marked for deletion. All right, so I'm just going to go into loop recording here on this track. I'm just going to play whatever, just get a couple loops here. As you can see here, there's a little number there showing the take number as it loops around. So I'm going to stop. And now there's all these different takes here. If we search for mark take in the action list, we can assign some actions for marking last pass for deletion or marking last pass as favorite. And if we marked a few of them for deletion, we can also run this action, delete takes that are marked for deletion. That'll just get rid of all of those. So the last take, obviously that was blank, so we can just mark that for deletion, and it puts a little icon on there. Let's do one more pass of recording. Okay, and I'll mark that one as a favorite. And you can see here it puts in a little star. And if I run this action to delete takes that are marked for deletion, it's just going to delete that take. I think these are pretty cool, and if you assign these to keyboard shortcuts, especially on a remote control or something like that, this can save a lot of time when you're loop recording. You just automatically delete it at the end of the recording. Support optional animation or blinking for toolbar buttons. Animate, ripple edit, mouse modifier, override toolbar buttons by default. Support up to 32 main toolbars and 16 MIDI toolbars. There are now 32 main toolbars. So we only had 16 up until this version. So if you're a toolbar fiend, if you use them a lot for different workflows, this is great. There's also 16 for the MIDI editor instead of just 8. You would also see that there are animations for certain toolbar buttons in the main toolbar. So ripple edits, mouse modifier, overrides are animated. We can customize that. So we go to Customize Toolbar, go to the mouse modifiers for razor editing, right click, highlight with animation based on toggle state. So these are toggle actions, and we can animate it if it's enabled or disabled. We can set it to do not animate. And then there's the highlight animation, armed animation, slow blink, and fast blink. Armed actions such as my fast edit mode here will also animate. That's the animation for armed. And you can disable that by going to Preferences, Appearance, Do Not Animate Armed Toolbar Buttons. Actions that aren't toggles or are not something that can be armed do not have an animation option there. MIDI editor. Support vertical zoom scroll in CC lanes. Support pitch wheel lane semitone range, snap to semitone. There's actually a ton of MIDI editor stuff that I would like to talk about. A lot of it goes over my head. A lot of it's very niche. These two things I think can be applicable to most users that use MIDI CCs at all, without any special hardware or any of that stuff. So first is, let's just put in some pitch bend here. So that's what pitch bend looks like. One thing that was added is this snap function. So the first time we click on the snap function in the CC lane, we'll get this little pitch wheel range control. So let's say our range is set to 4 semitones. Now, if we make any edits to this, it will snap to these semitone ranges. And Shift Command will zoom in the selected CC lane so you can better position things and all that kind of stuff. So there's a zoom for the MIDI CC lanes. If you're doing really fine detailed editing of MIDI CCs, that zoom can be really helpful to get the specific values that you want. And also snapping for drawing in pitch bend information. Let me just double click in the lane to select all. I'm going to delete it, and I'll put in a point here snap that to 4 semitones up, and I'll choose a new point, and I'll bend down there to exactly back to 0. Nice, clean, smooth bend. And I can change that curve by alt dragging. This stuff isn't new other than the snapping, but I think this is a great addition. If you use pitch bends at all, it's super nice to have the pitch bend hit that pitch bend to precise values at certain moments. Without that, it is very difficult. You'd have to remember the precise number in the full pitch bend range, some 8,000 or something. It's not easy. So yeah, this is a great addition that I think anyone using MIDI at all, not even touching the MPE stuff, this is very important. It's a nice change. And that's pretty much it. That's all I could cover today. It's so much stuff. There's so much to talk about. The changelog has probably another 200 things that I didn't even get to touch on today. But yeah, this is a big update, and there are so many more changes coming in the next coming years. So just like with version 6 was a big update, but then there were so many thousands additional things over the next, I think it was 3 or 4 years. So this is not the end of what's coming in Reaper 7, but I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you missed any previous videos in the series, and all the way back to Reaper 5.0, I'll have a link to the playlist down below. You can support the Reaper blog through Patreon or YouTube memberships, donations, super thanks, buying a t-shirt, all these things. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.